Hey, it's me, the NPC. Dragon Ball FighterZ is looking awesome. It's been so long since Dragon Ball had a more traditional fighting game, and I can't think of a better studio for the job than Arc System Works. Being the rampant speculator that I am, I can't help but think about what kind of roster we could see. Given that this is being developed in a new engine, we can expect the roster to be much smaller than previous Dragon Ball games. Just looking at Guilty Gear Zerd's launch lineup of 17 characters, we can assume that Dragon Ball FighterZ will have around the same number, and that the 9 characters we know about already make up roughly half the roster. Just so we're all caught up, the current confirmed roster is Goku, Vegeta, Kid Gohan, Frieza, Perfect Cell, Majin Buu, Future Trunks, Piccolo, and Krillin. Great lineup so far. We've got iconic characters all around and a good mix of playstyles. Now for my roster, I'm going to go for 20 with 4 potential DLC characters tacked on. I don't necessarily expect all of them to make it into the final product. I'm just shooting high with a first draft, and what the final version would include would depend on how the actual development cycle goes. Some characters just might not take shape in practice, some may have to be cut for time, maybe a miracle happens and we actually get to include more than 20. It's the kind of thing that you can't entirely predict, only prepare for. I'm also going to be playing to the rules that the ARC devs have publicly discussed in terms of their own choices. No alternate forms of characters taking their own spots on the roster, no adult Gohan, no Majin Vegeta, no Imperfect Cell, no Gogeta. I almost made an exception for Kid Buu, but decided against it. I'm only going for characters that could realistically hold up their own in a fight with the rest of the cast, for example no Bulma, Dende, or Mr. Popo.
Popo's about to teach you the pecking order.
I will be aiming for representation of all things Dragon Ball, within reason. We also need to consider timing. It takes a lot of time to plan and design a fighting game character, and characters that only have been introduced to the franchise recently can't really be brought to life in DBF that quickly. A plan like this would have to be laid out before development even started, which means we'd have to dial things back to before the game was even announced. As such, I'm setting an unofficial cutoff date of the Goku Black saga. Anyone more recent than that is just too new for the devs to ever be able to realistically make something out of them. Sorry, Califlaw. Finally, my choices for the roster will be based on a combination of their iconic status and what they have to offer for the gameplay. For example, Birder would hypothetically take priority over Jace because Birder's high speed has greater moveset potential than anything Jace has to offer. Alright, enough beating around the bush, let's get into the roster. Right after this message from my sponsor Loot, I'm kidding. First up is obviously Android 18. Admittedly, I'm not sure exactly what sort of playstyle to give her that would make her stand out. Maybe something of a lightweight grappler, maybe more of an all-rounder. Regardless of how she plays, her popularity alone was enough to shoot her straight to the top of my list. Next up is Beerus, the breakout new character of the Dragon Ball Super era. He's right up there with Frieza and Cell, so of course he has to be in there. For moveset, I see Beerus very much as the Akuma for DBF. Make him a high aggro character that can chain huge amounts of damage, but he's also a glass cannon that dies very quickly to balance things out. I know that's not 100% accurate, but he'd be insanely OP if he was exactly like he is in the source material. Up next is the burly badass with the brain of a baby gone berserk, Broly. Yeah, I know Kale is basically the same character, but with actual canonicity, tits, and a backstory that isn't complete bullshit. However, not only do we have the timing concerns I mentioned earlier, but Broly is simply much more recognizable and would be the perfect rep for the Dragon Ball movies. For playstyle, he'd be a close quarters fighter with long windups for his attacks, but every individual strike hits like a truck. Probably not that viable at higher levels, but he'd be a perfect character for new players or casuals who don't want to learn elaborate combos. Then we have Tien, a character who's endured since the original Dragon Ball, and is still in action for the current universe survival arc. Sure, he's mostly been stuck on the sideline since the OG DB, but he's still had his share of great moments that could form a full moveset. Specifically, he would be the guy you use to lock down your opponent and set up combos. Solar Flare to stun, Shinki Koho to ground slam, but also moves like 4 Supernatural Fists and Dodon Ray to make him more than just an assist character. Next! I don't want to do this any more than you do, but there should be a GT character. and it should be Omega Shenron. On the plus side, giving him the abilities of all of the Shadow Dragons would make for a very diverse moveset. Fire, ice, lightning, poison gas, and more. GT might be crap, but that doesn't mean its resident fighter has to be too. Let's have ourselves a little fun to cleanse our palate after that, and no one knows how to have fun better than Captain Ginyu. There has to be at least one Ginyu Force member on the roster, and who better than the man that the team is named after? Plus, his body change technique would easily be one of the most unique abilities out there. Just think about how tense games could get knowing that you or your opponent has a character that can swap bodies and health bars with one of the other player's characters. He's someone where getting the crap beaten out of you and being far behind in health can actually be a winning strategy. Next, we've got another new character with the intergalactic assassin, Hit. It only makes sense for him to have a more precise playstyle as opposed to the more bombastic characters. His beam attacks would be much narrower than the rest of the cast, but deal significant damage. He has a really high difficulty curve, but the payoff can be huge once you master him. Then we have Gotenks, a good rep for the fusion concept who doesn't really overlap with Future Trunks. Plenty of moveset potential with all of the stupid gimmicky moves they came up with to fight Super Boo. Key among them, however, is the Ghost Kamikaze attack, which would be the basis of a satellite moveset. And speaking of ghosts, Nappa. Most of his playstyle would be something of a Diet Broly, a heavy-hitting striker, almost a boxer style of character, but with his share of key attacks mixed in. Maybe also incorporate the Cybermen as assists to make him stand out more. Now this next one is going to sound like a joke, but hear me out. Master Roshi. I know he hasn't been a high-tier fighter for a very long time, but the original teacher of Goku and Krillin has still stuck around, and has been having a bit of a comeback in Super. Plus, there is room for a good moveset with him as a slower, more defensive character. Makes perfect sense for the founder of the Turtle School of Martial Arts. Throw in a bulked up super form and the original Kamehameha wave, and Roshi can actually bring a lot to the roster. Now, this next one is a joke, but it's a joke worth making. Mr. Satan. Joke characters can be a lot of fun to include, and Mr. Satan is easily the best fit. Several other games have made him work already by equipping him with a bunch of Capsule Corp tech. It's both good for a laugh and gives him room to actually be fairly viable. That does it for main roster, but I've still got a few extra for potential DLC, or just making the roster bigger if fates allow. First is Android 17, whom I'm sure has had a lot of you screaming your heads off at me for most of this video. He is a fan favorite and has had a resurgence in relevance with the Universe Survival arc, but I was just too concerned with how he would be differentiated from 18 for me to make him a higher priority. However, he is still someone that deserves to make it in at some point. Up next is Galactic Patrolman Jaco. While he is not that strong compared to the rest of the cast, I still want to include him for his place in Dragon Ball's history. This is a guy who started out with his own standalone series that was only loosely tied into the Dragon Ball universe, and looked to be Akira Toriyama's last hurrah before retirement. Instead, it helped plant the seeds that reinvigorated Toriyama's passion for the series and led to us getting the Super Series and Dragon Ball's current comeback in general. If it weren't for Jaco, we might not even be getting Dragon Ball FighterZ in the first place. As for playstyle, a projectile-heavy keep-away character similar to Krillin, but with a more gadgety feel, would be a perfect fit. Then we have Dr. Gero, aka Android 20. Picture this. Your opponent goes all out and fires off their most powerful attack for a killing blow. Then, at the perfect moment, you tag in Android 20 to perform a counter super where he absorbs the opponent's attack, regaining meter and maybe even health in return. Now imagine that happening at EVO. Yeah, 20 is the character you play when you want to pull off the heist of the century. Granted, the absorption move would have to be incredibly precise in order to balance out how much of an impact it can have. Still, just imagine the moments he could create. Both the satisfying and the salty. And last but not least, the Demon King Deborah. We could use another Boo Saga rep, and Deborah has plenty of interesting moveset potential. On top of the usual strikes and beams, he could also manifest weapons for some distinct attacks. And, of course, there's his signature petrifying spit that could define him as a character that sets up big combos similar to Tien. And that is how I would build the roster for Dragon Ball FighterZ. Keep in mind that this was only meant as a first draft and is open to change. As such, please leave a comment below and let me know how this roster could be improved. Who deserves higher priority? Who got left out that should be in there? Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Fuck Goku Black.